Welcome, everyone. For the next 28 and a half minutes, Mark Phillips, formerly running Blue Frog and now doing exciting things with Mark Phillips Associates, and myself are going to be tackling the topic of legacy and individual giving, where current approaches fall short and how to fix it. And what I would say is there's an awful lot of information in there. We're going to be following this up anyway, or certainly I am, with some. We'll send you the presentation. You get a link to the webinar, and there'll be some peripheral information as well. So there's the two of us. Myself, I'm going to be talking about legacy. Mark is going to be talking about individual giving and a little bit of legacy as well. There's a common theme, I would say, throughout the webinar about comprehension and understanding and getting closer to supporters. First off, just wow. I mean, really, it seems that almost every major and nearly every minor charity has attended. We've got 400 fundraisers, 200 charities. We have representation from the likes of CRUK, Macmillan, RSPCA, many of the huge charities, and a lot of the little ones as well. And we also have a lot of the talented suppliers as well down there on the right-hand side. Right, so just a very quick over. Thank you for filling out. Many of you filled out this State of Fundraising in 2026 survey. There's a lot in there. There's a few things I just want to pull out. First thing was individual giving response rates have weakened over the last 3 years. Legacy income is holding firm, is actually improving. There wasn't a lot of benchmarking going on. So 60-70% have very little benchmarking there. Half think prioritizing response over long-term value, which is a bit of an issue and does bode well or bode poorly for going forward. And only 8% think that IG and legacy programs are actually highly integrated. And for me, the key insight really that came out of this is it wasn't a problem about finding supporters. It's really a question of what you say to them. And that really goes back to understanding them. There was concern about models tell you who to talk to, but not actually what to say. Right, I'm now going to allow Mark to do his slot. Okay.
All right, let me share my deck. And hopefully everyone can see this.
Yep.
Picture of this rather scruffily dressed rich gentleman in his countryside. And I'm gonna kick off. So today I'm hopefully going to be sharing what I would see as a little bit of good news and a little bit of giving you a nudge in a positive direction on what we can be achieving with our IG fundraising over the next few years. So, the summary point, there is plenty of money out there, but I don't necessarily think we understand exactly what the people who have that money actually want from charities. Now, one of the charts that I use regularly and in my blog posts and in my presentations is this chart here, looking at individual giving in the UK. The blue columns show the actual income that we're generating, and the orange columns show where we would be if we'd maintained parity with 2005 adjusted for inflation. And you can see we're looking at, as we all know, a £4.4 billion shortfall. It fell by £1.5 billion this year. But I think some of the other frightening stuff that we saw was the idea that there are now 6 million fewer donors than 10 years ago. When we look at giving as a percentage of GDP, the situation is slightly worse. Outside of 2010, and I don't know how many fundraisers we've got who've been fundraising for 15 years, but that was the Haiti earthquake when we had our big peak in giving. We've never really matched 2005 as a percentage of giving. And I think one of the points that we should perhaps highlight is about 2004, 2005 is when digital giving really kicked off as a fundraising mechanism. And I think that there's something about that when we've used digital and we've automated I think perhaps we've lost a little bit of what good fundraising is about. Now, over those 20 years, the country has got a third richer, but we are a third less generous. Now, that's pretty damning, really. And as was announced in by CAF, just 50% of the population now give. So, pretty horrific figures. However, this is the book, this is the report that we always tend to turn to. And I've been tracking that for years. But there is another report as well that CAF publicise, and it's their report on high value giving. And that's where the positivity lies, really, because if you look at both of these reports, we get a slightly different picture than if we just focus on what I would say the normal donors. Now, the money didn't really disappear. When we've seen this shrinking group, what we found is it's pulled, and it's pulled upwards. The money has really moved to the top 500,000 people in the country. Now, these are people with who hold £1 million of investable assets. So that's outside of their homes and their pensions, really. It's looking at the wealth they have. And that's worth £2 trillion. Now, this group of ultra wealthy people are actually giving more. And if we look at the data, the giving alone from that group is worth about £8 billion that's coming from that top 1%. And so that's the group that we tend to ignore. So it's not 14 billion we're raising, it's actually almost 22 billion. So this top 1% is giving about a third, and they give very little of what they can afford. So it's about 0.4% of their assets that they give to charity each year. And don't forget that if we take the mega wealthy out of that, the typical gift from this group of millionaires and multimillionaires only works out at about £52 a month. And if we look at the reasons for that, I think the contrast between Sheffield and Kensington is an excellent way to illustrate this. The typical person in Sheffield will give 1.64% of their income to charity, whereas someone from Kensington is giving just 0.3%. Now, that doesn't mean that people in Sheffield are lovely and people in Kensington are horrible. It's slightly different. And I think that we have to address that in terms of our fundraising. So, the average Brit earning 34.5 typically gives £20 a month. Someone earning 180,000 gives £30 a month. And someone earning £250,000 typically gives £40 a month. And obviously, you can work out from that somebody living in Kensington probably earns typically more than £250,000. But we only have to look at that pro bono economics research from a couple of years ago, which highlighted that people with £100,000 worth or more of assets and investments could give £2.8 billion more to charity a year without feeling a squeeze. So we have to ask, why don't they? Well, when we speak to these donors, what they say is they give because they give what they are asked for. And every mid-value study I've done, going back years, people have said the same things. Look at the first quote there. If they ask me, I could give more. I don't know why they never ask. They always ask for 10 or 20 pounds. Or we've got the £2 or the £3 a month there. And I think that's the key point that we really need to focus on. We aren't asking enough. Let's take a look at, if we went to one website of one charity in the country and we looked what they asked for. Let's imagine that we're all multimillionaires, something happens to us, somebody in our family gets ill, or we see a news story or something, I'm going to give to that organisation. We go online to that website and we look what the prompts are. And we're literally being prompted as a single gift, £30. Or monthly £30 as well, but we are being prompted very, very low. And people always tell us they give what they ask for. We were speaking with somebody who who sponsored a dog with guide dogs, very, very wealthy, merchant banker. Why do you give £8? That is what they asked me for. Now, if we look across a whole group of different charities, looking at prompt levels, so we've got the low prompt, we've got the mid, and we've got the highest here, you can see how low those prompts are. We are not really prompting online, and we're not asking in many mailing packs either, or any other routes, for that group, that 1% who can afford to give a great deal more. Now look at the left-hand side, one-off single gift. At the bottom, you've got a few of my sort of ex-clients down there: UNHCR, Alzheimer's, MSF, Marie Curie, all got those high prompts. But then you go down the other end, someone like Crux or NSPCC, you've got a lot of low prompts. Now, either the people on the top are asking well, or the people on the bottom are asking, well, I don't know which is which. Well, I know what I would guess it is, but one of those is either annoying donors, another one is leaving a lot of money on the table. And when we speak to donors, what they tend to tell us is, I could give more. Now, here's an example of how we drove growth simply by changing the way we asked. So here is MSF going back to 2005. And I don't know if James Clifton is out there, one of my favourite fundraisers who I worked with, but we worked with MSF around the mid-2000s. And you can see at 2014, 2015, income starts to go up. We did one simple thing around this point. We asked for more. So here's the pack that we produced that started to change that trajectory. We doubled the primary prompt. We went from £10 to £20 overnight. We were breaking even with 16 months, and we didn't find much depression either. Now, whenever we've increased a regular gift, and we did it ages ago with ActionAid, the reduction in the number of people signing up was low, but the amount we raised was much, 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 much higher. Now, the other thing that we need to remember is the wealthy are getting richer, particularly that top 1%. Now, in the UK, we're in the midst of a £5.5 trillion wealth transfer. Now, the fact is that that money is going to that wealthier group, so the 1% at the 1% at the top. And the other point that we have to remember is, when do they inherit it? People inherit when they're about 60 years old. So they've paid off their mortgage, they've paid off their school fees, and suddenly they inherit a significant amount of money. And when we speak to them, what do they say? I want to give that money to something that might honour my parent who's recently died. But again, in all the interviews we have with people, I have got too much money, I don't know what to do with it. Now, this might make you laugh, but it is what we're told. Look at that bottom right. I have a substantial pension, which I believe I have no moral claim to. I choose not to collect a state pension as I deem it unethical. My desire is to honour my husband's wishes by giving as generously as possible to charity. We have to get our asks out there. And when we're focusing on advertising things like Facebook or Meta, we don't reach those people who have this level of wealth. So let's consider things in a slightly new perspective. So we are looking at, rather than a donor journey, we're looking at a donor's journey through life here. So we've got that younger donor, perhaps doing more things like campaigning. They get older, they have a family, and eventually they get old. Now, during the main body of our life, what donors are actually asking charities at that point is, what are you going to do now about a problem? That's lifetime giving. As they start getting older and they start getting towards the end of their life, it starts to change. So when we start looking at legacy giving, it becomes more about, what are you going to be doing after I die? But the key issue here is, when we speak to donors who are starting to give large amounts of money, it's not so much, what are you going to do now? What's going to happen as a result of this gift? So organisation, for example, like a hospice involved in end-of-life care, when you speak to their donors and it's about giving now, often they'll talk about nursing care. When it becomes a legacy or a larger gift, it's the maintenance of a service. What's going to keep things operational? How are we going to keep the buildings up to standard? Staffing, equipment. The other point that we have to come in and take into account here, when we consider legacies, which David is going to be speaking about, is at the beginning, it's much more of a private act. We give privately, we don't share. As we move to legacies, suddenly it becomes more about who we are, identity becomes important, because we need to start taking into account that our gift is going to be made public. It is going to be read about after we die, and people are going to perceive, and donors want people to perceive us as nice people and making positive decisions. So we do need to remember that. So the more you give, the more it's about you. So 3 things to consider when you thank: affirm identity. Don't just acknowledge that gift. Show the donor they're a great person. Feedback. Show meaning, not just outputs, what it means that donor has given to you. And finally, frame. Place the donor inside the story. Allow them to see what their choice has made possible. So in conclusion, if we look at this group who are giving £8 billion, the money's there, the will is there, the understanding is often missing. So always consider, when someone gives money to charity, they are not giving money away. They are giving you money to do something. And so consider, what is the donor thinking? And I think a very good line to consider anything is, what is the donor saying to you when they're deciding to give? What is in it for me? And there you go, David. That's my 12.5 minutes. As
Wonderful.
promised.
Thank you. Excellent. I never doubted you finishing on time. So.
I will now hand that back to you.
All right. Okay, thank you very much, Mark. So I'm going to be focusing on 5 themes that came out of the study, the survey that you completed, guys, or many of you did. First thing is looking at competition. It's increasing, certainly for legacy, more charities entering the market, and it's just generally more intense. Many charities are struggling to differentiate. They know who to target, but they don't know what matters to them in terms of the supporter. We don't always translate this insight into communication, so we're going to have a look at how you might do that. And finally, measuring performance. Legacy has perhaps a unique challenge in measuring success and keeping everyone on board because of that. So first thing is competition. Before I delve into this, I just want to give a little bit of credibility and context to where this is coming from. So we, over the last 8 years, have developed a huge data set, 60,000 responses across 100 charities, 20,000 hours of field work. It's important is across charities, because legacy is a selective, competitive discipline. So your relative performance is important, and introspection, I think, is a real issue for charities who are too inward looking. They need to be comparing the performance with others. Thousands of variables. We've also built this in collaboration with Dr. Tom Burke, who works at FastMap. He's his PhD in psychology, and he's applied a lot of his thinking to how we have built the data, how the models are all interconnected. So it allows us to not just have a tracking system, but a proactive optimization engine. We know what people think, and we know what people will be motivated to change their behavior. So we're able to put that in case. And there's some academic papers, which I'll email over after this, which you can have a read of, which justifies some of this. First thing is the journey. So this is taking 1,000 average supporters who support a variety of charities. In this case, about 50% might support CRUK. As they move down to considering a legacy, perhaps that goes from 8 down to 3.6. This is from our data, and then ultimately maybe pledging to, on average, the medium is about 1.8. So you can see there's a deselection process. It's relatively easy to get a transactional gift. It's a lot more difficult to get a pledge and ultimately a gift in will. You have to have a strong, very strong connection with that charity. And if you wanted more evidence, we've been downloading 50, 60, 70 will guides over the last month for reasons that I will share in a few moments. And what struck me is that as we go in this case, we're searching for Save the Children Legacy Will Guide and downloading it, there's quite a lot of sponsored links where other charities are getting in on the act and trying to entice this inquirer to get their will guide rather than those. And this is a real illustration of what's happening. Okay, next thing, identity. Impact versus identity. I think this is I'm very proud of this slide, actually. It really encapsulates, I think, the issue we have with these two different disciplines, individual giving and legacy. So giving is, generally speaking, we see the cause, we see the impact. That's what is going to motivate someone to give a gifted will. But as Mark alluded to before, when we start to think about leaving a gifting will, it's like we're looking in the mirror. It's, what does this stand for? What is it? Who am I? And there's some stuff that Dr. Tom Burke did in one of his papers about, as we get closer to death, our identity it solidifies, it becomes more important. And we want to articulate that through a gifted will, which is one of the most profound acts that we will do in our life. So, looking at these psychographic profiles that we have built, there are 6 of them. There is family-orientated, traditionalist, symbolic immortality, prestige, impact focus, and charity identity. What is interesting is that people are doing essentially the same thing. They're leaving a gifting will for a charity, but they're doing it for different personal reasons. And some of the language you use will jar. So if you're talking to someone who is motivated by prestige and they are a family-orientated person or have charitable identity, it won't encourage engagement. We all have a little bit of this, each one of these, but knowing groups that have a dominant presence of one of these is a real, it really helps you to frame messaging. This slide is, it just really focuses on the issue I think the sector has. We did a webinar about 3 months ago, and we asked people to say, which of the following best reflects the different mindsets your supporters bring to legacy giving? This is what fundraisers thought. And impact focus was by far the dominant one. Prestige was the least. We then looked at the actual data. Now, this is all aggregated at a charity level and then up to the sector level. But what you can see there is that impact focus isn't actually the most significant personality trait for any sector, and prestige is. It's the most significant one for cancer and children. Now, obviously, when we get into individual charities, individual segments within them, there will be groups of people who absolutely will be driven by impact and vice versa. But at a very high level, it's interesting that disconnect between what fundraisers think, still in the mindset of impact, when actually there's a variety of different internal reasons why supporters will leave a gift in their will. It's about themselves. Next thing, difference. So differences exist. On the right-hand side, we've got the psychographic traits of 6 different charities. Now, each of those lines, as you can see at the top, they denote a different prevalence and order of psychographic trait. And each of the dots is a segment. So if they were all consistent, they'd be flat lines. They're not. They're all over the place. So different segments within your own supporter base have different dominant traits. And understanding who they are, what they are, allows you to frame messaging which will create more engagement. And there's other ways we can look at difference. So there's a relationship they have with a charity. Are they a volunteer, a donor? This is their visceral, their physical, often, relationship they have. The strategic drivers, which you haven't spoken about today, this is what drives engagement. Some are very different. We've got psychographic profile. And then we've got the barriers, the reasons why they won't. So maybe they're worried about the family being upset, or maybe it's the will is too complicated. So a variety of differences. So the challenge really is to move from not one conversation to everyone, which many charities are doing, and not a unique conversation for every supporter, which is nirvana, but come up with cohesive and distinct groups, which when we communicate to them, it justifies a separate and distinct message. And I think that is the next iteration of fundraising, where we're getting closer to understanding. We're moving away from one thing to fit all into cohesive groups of meaningfully cohesive individuals. So how do we optimize creativity? So we have something now on our portal, or our sort of optimization engine, which I sort of prefer to think of it of. It's an active data set. So we can load up a gift, a legacy will guide, as we have done. We put it through this process, and out will come this report. So the horizontal axis is how important each attribute is to the audience. The vertical axis is how well that is articulated through the piece of creative. So top right, it's working well for the audience and it's coming through on the creative. Bottom left, we're wasting space. It's not important for the audience, this particular attribute, but nonetheless, we're giving it coverage. Bottom left, it's not important for the audience and we're including it. And then bottom right, the biggest opportunity, important for the audience, but it's not coming through in the creative. So I'm going to show you an example of that. In Cat Protection, a client of ours has kindly agreed to show the analysis we've done on their will guide. I'm just going to show a short video here, and you should be able to see what's going on. So we've loaded the will guide up. AI is connected to this data set, and what it's doing is now it's measuring the performance of the content of that against the strategic drivers and seeing how compatible it is. So we can see that. I'm just going to stop that. So we can see there, we can see top right hand here that tribute is very important for this particular audience, and it's also coming through in the creative, which is excellent. There are some things which are overplayed, which perhaps is you could deploy in a slightly different way. What you can also do is you can identify different audiences. So it might be you want to find out what young people or wealthy people or rich or people who are leaving a gifting will just very soon want. And we can understand what they want and we can optimize the creative in that way. So this is just running through. We're looking now at process. So we can see some things are coming through and some things aren't. And finally, that one there. Okay, so that's how you might optimize it. We've done this for a lot of will guides. We've loaded up. If you're interested, please do get in contact afterwards, and we can have a chat at some of the findings that we've got. So how does this optimization work in practice? So you load some content, you evaluate it, and maybe you look at two different segments. So the illustration I've got here is wealthy supporters or those that are close proximity to the cause. Perhaps you could pull through some weaknesses in a covering letter to emphasize and make that will guide more compatible. You could do the same with another cause there. So you're optimizing that content. Alternatively, what you can do, you can load up ideas before they've been fully developed, prior to the cost of production, put it through this optimization engine, and you can find out what's good and what isn't, and then you go to full production. Right, final thing is measurement. So we are aware that legacy has a unique challenge with measurement. So many people will measure things from looking at income, which is historical, sometimes due to activity that happened a number of years ago. We also have response metrics, guide requests, event attendees, etc., which is sort of relatively short term. And then we have the sort of more future-facing thing, the emotional engagement, which is a constant. And one of the challenges with response metrics is that as people get older, they just withdraw from life. There's some wonderful research done by Professor Russell James in the States about this challenge that if you're judging propensity to leave a gifting will on recency, frequency, value, you can be disappointed because people withdraw, but their passion, their emotional connection does not diminish. So I'd simply say, put a little more emphasis on measuring comparative emotional engagement. So not introspect, not looking at just how you're doing, but compare with others. and then you'll get a more rounded assessment. This is a last piece here, and what we've done here, we've mapped across all the, or many of the charities we have in our portal. So the horizontal axis is income, and we're simply looking, has income gone up in the last 3 years? And there you see, in most cases they have. They're on the right hand side. But on the vertical axis is engagement. So you can see whether engagement is better or worse. So just as a few there, we've got cystic fibrosis, diabetes and Alzheimer's, all of which I believe are, by complete coincidence, ex-clients of Mark's, but they're doing well on engagement, which is a future-facing metric. Okay, that's it. We're 2 minutes over time. Thank you very much for your attendance. We will be sending emails after this, probably in the next couple of days. It won't be immediately. Mark, do you want to say any final thoughts at all?
No, just thank you very much for coming along. Cystic fibrosis wasn't one of ours. It was Alzheimer's and diabetes that were. And so it was it's very gratifying to see them in the top right hand corner. And again, if anyone wants to chat further about this wealthier group, please get in touch. Plenty to share on that, and plenty of examples of how it's working as a fundraising product.
Lovely. Thank you very much.